boys are home again, all over the world, and rain or snow is all that may fall from the skies above. A kiss won't mean goodbye, but hello to love. When the lights go on again, all over the world, and the ships will sail again, all over the world, then we'll have time for things like wedding rings, and 3 hearts will sing when the lights go on again.
In November 1940, the construction of an airfield began on the eastern side of Normanton Lane, immediately to the north of the village of Normanton, between Bottesford and Long Bennington. This airfield was intended from the start to be a parent station for No. 5 Group, and so 3 concrete runways were laid: the main 210 at 1700 yards, 277 1200 yards, and 336 at 1300 yards. However, 210 was extended to 1933 yards, 277 to 1460 yards, and 336 to 1510 yards. There were originally 36 pan-type dispersals laid, 5 of which were lost in the extension of the taxiways. A further 21 loop dispersals were later added. The main technical site was situated to the northeast side and dispersed domestic sites in fields towards the A1 trunk road. It was provided with a watch office with Met section to Plan 51840. Originally, Bottesford had one T2 hangar located on the technical site and another at the southwest corner of the airfield. This was later increased by adding 7 more on the technical site, plus a B1 hangar for Ministry of Aircraft Production Engineers. The dispersed campsites, comprising 11 domestic, 2 communal and a sick quarters, were to the north of the airfield. This allowed for a population of 120 officers and 1,940 other ranks, with separate accommodation for 10 WAF officers and 411 WAFs. The bomb stores were in Moss Plantation to the southeast of the airfield, and another to the south of the airfield. The fuel store was to the east near Rowell Farm, and the firing butts were situated across the road at Normanton, with level crossing gates installed so that the road could still be used by civilians. Like many other airfields, once off the concrete, Bottesford proved to be very muddy in wet weather. Q-type decoy airfields were built at Beaver, Foston and Tifby. These dummy airfields aimed to draw enemy bombers away from the true airfield, with lights simulating runway lights. These were closed in 1942. A mobile beacon was used at Bottesford to flash the station's pundit code of AQ in Morse code to guide homeward bound planes returning from night raids. On the 4th of September 1941, RAF Bottesford opened into No. 5 Group Bomber Command, but then lay empty until the 10th of October, when 24 blind beam approach flight formed there with 6+2 Oxfords. The HQ for the flight was at RAF Newton. The flight was renumbered as 1524 BAT on the 14th of November. Number 207 Squadron arrived from Waddington under Wing Commander Abrams on the 17th with the twin Vulture-engined Manchesters.
Hats off to the Avro Manchester. Used with striking success in the latest and biggest RAF bombing offensive against Germany, it's the most luxuriously fitted of our new bombers. Heat from the engine is regulated throughout to provide a sort of central heating system. One of the most powerful aircraft in the world, the Manchester's defensive armament comprises 8 machine guns mounted in 3 power-operated turrets, 2 each in the nose and dorsal turrets, and 4 in the tail. Its bomb racks can accommodate the heaviest bombs yet in service. Coupled with the fact that the standard of crew comfort rivals that of a civilian airliner, is its steadiness in flight, efficiently soundproofed interior, and complete absence of vibration.
The Manchester bombers participated in daylight raids on the docks at the port of Lorient, industrial targets in Germany, the battleships in harbour at Brest, and mine-laying sorties known as gardening off the Dutch coast. But the Manchester was prone to a variety of hydraulic and engine problems, which sometimes reduced its flying ceiling and caused many crews to abort their missions. One aircraft was test flown for visiting engineers studying the problems with the Manchester, with a simulated full bomb load. While it easily attained 17,000 feet, the pilot then noticed that the engine cowlings were coming loose. The flying instruments showed no problem, but the pilot decided to return to Bottesford, and on his approach saw one of the engines moving up and down on its mounts. Overheating had almost melted the mounts. Fortunately, he made a safe landing. In December, Wing Commander Crosby took over as the CO of the squadron. By the end of 1941, the RAF had realised that the Manchester was not the bomber they had hoped for. The lack of power from the engines, the low ceiling height and the unreliability saw mounting losses. The revised Manchester, the 4-engined Lancaster, offered more promise. The first production Lancaster made its maiden flight in October 1941, powered by Merlin engines instead of the Manchester's underpowered Vulture engines. But it would take time to reach the squadrons. 207 was stood down from operations on the 10th of December with instruction that all engine manifolds were to be changed. 10 flight crews were given 5 days' leave. On the 16th, training resumed with 6 Manchesters having been made available for training flights and some formation flying practice. 12 Manchesters were detailed for an operation on the 27th to Dusseldorf, but the group reduced that to 7 before takeoff. 1 turned back with engine trouble, and the aircraft made a crash landing at Martlesham Heath with no injuries to the crew. Owing to faulty electrical supply to Intercom, 1 aircraft bombed the secondary target for the docks at Ostend. The other 5 successfully bombed the railway marshalling yards at Dusseldorf. 6 aircraft landed back at Horsham St Faith due to adverse weather conditions at base. On the 8th of January 1942, the target was the harbour at Brest and the battleships Scharnhorst and Gneisenau. Manchester L7322 is believed to have been hit by flak and crashed into the sea off Crozon, with all crew killed. Only 3 of the bodies were ever recovered. On the 14th, the Hamburg shipyards and an airframe factory were the targets. 4 aircraft failed to return and a further 2 crashed in England. L7523 crashed near King's Farm House at Hauntings at 20:45. It hit the ground and burst into flames with all 7 killed. Number 207 Squadron conversion flight formed on the 16th of January 1942 for the conversion of the squadron from the problematic Manchesters to Lancasters, which they began to receive in March. However, the transition from the Manchester to the Lancaster would not be straightforward, and there were initial training losses. Whilst on a training flight on Saturday the 28th of March at 13:20, Lancaster R5501 collided in the air with Miles Master 2 DE973 from RAF College Cranwell. The aircraft crashed at Canwick Hill east of Bracebridge Heath, 2 miles south of Lincoln. 4 aircrew were killed, along with the pilot and the master. On the 8th of April, Lancaster R5498 crashed adjacent to Normanton Lodge on approach to Bottesford during training, but all crew were safe. The same day, 1524 BAT was transferred from 5 Group Bomber Command to No. 21 Training Group. On the night of the 24th of May, Lancaster R5617 hit the ground in poor visibility near to Tavistock in Devon. In the resultant crash, 4 of the crew were killed. June saw the start of the operational losses for the Lancasters. The night of June the 3rd to the 4th, Lancaster R5847 was shot down 14 kilometres south-southeast of Assen while on a mission to Bremen, with all crew killed. The bomber stream was attacked by German night fighters, and as a result, a number of aircrew from various squadrons were lost. 4 more losses occurred before August arrived, and Wing Commander Burnett took over as the CO of the squadron. And then on the 6th, one of the most bizarre accidents to happen at Bottesford was when Manchester L7385 landed very badly and somehow ended up on top of Lancaster R5550, which was also at that time engaged in training operations. R5550 was destroyed by fire. 2 of the crew in the Manchester and 3 of the crew in the Lancaster were killed. The remaining 5 crewmen, whilst not killed in the accident, all sustained various degrees of injury. No. 207 conversion flight moved to Swinderby on the 22nd to be disbanded into 1660 Heavy Conversion Unit. By the end of the month, the Bottesford runway surfaces were seriously breaking up and needed urgent repairs. 207's tenure at Bottesford was drawing to a close, but before they departed at the end of September there were a few more losses. During the operation to Bremen on the 5th of September, R5755 was shot down into the Lisselmeer east of Medemblik. All crew died. On the 10th, R5628 was shot down and crashed into the sea 6 miles southwest of Tiburon in Denmark, whilst on a gardening operation to Kattegat. And finally, on the 17th, Lancaster L7571 was lost without trace on the Essen raid. On the 20th, 207 Squadron was moved to Bottesford Satellite Airfield at Langar, never to return, and Bottesford's runways underwent much needed repairs. At the beginning of November, a repaired Bottesford reopened, and No. 90 Squadron reformed there on the 7th, with Wing Commander Claydon as the CO, without aircraft, but to be equipped with Stirlings.
Once the jolly swagsmen camped by a billabong, under the shade of a coolabah tree, and he sang as he watched and waited till his billy boiled. You'll come a waltzing Matilda with me, waltzing Matilda, waltzing Matilda, you'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. And he sang as he watched and waited till his billy boiled. You'll come a waltzing Matilda with me.
No. 467 Squadron Royal Australian Air Force arrived from Scampton with Lancasters on the 24th under the command of Wing Commander Gom, having formed there on the 7th from sea flight of No. 460 Squadron at RAF Breton. No. 90 Squadron received its first Stirling on the 1st of December and increased to operational strength through the month. On the 29th it was to be moved to Ridgewell in Essex before becoming operational. However, as the first aircraft touched down, it bounced and careered into a ditch, fortunately with no loss of life. 90 Squadron returned to Bottesford that day and moved to Ridgewell the next. 467 commenced operations as part of Bomber Command's main force on the 2nd to 3rd of January 1943 by laying mines off the French coast. According to the Royal Australian Air Force Museum, the squadron gained a reputation for accurate bombing and was selected to attack the Dortmund-Ems Canal on several occasions. The first loss for the squadron, Lancaster ED-367, took off at 17:26 hours on the night of the 7th to 8th of January to bomb Duisburg. It was lost without trace. January was to be a bad month. Lancaster W4378 took off at 17:05 hours on the night of the 17th to 18th to bomb Berlin. 8 aircraft of the squadron took part in the mission. W4378 was lost without trace. 5 aircraft took part in the mission to bomb Wilhelmshaven on the night of the 19th to 20th, 2 of which failed to return. Lancaster LD529 took off at 17:55 hours. Nothing was heard from the aircraft after takeoff and was lost without trace. Lancaster ED525 took off at 17:57 hours. Nothing was heard from the aircraft after takeoff and was lost without trace. 8 aircraft took part in the Nuremberg raid on the night of the 25th to 26th. Lancaster ED526 took off at 19:46 hours. The aircraft crashed near Wissendorf, 20 miles northwest of Nuremberg, presumably as a result of enemy action. All crew were killed. The next loss came on the night of the 11th to 12th of March when 8 aircraft from the squadron took part in the raid to bomb Stuttgart. Lancaster ED523 took off at 20:11 hours. The aircraft was hit by flak on completion of the bombing run. The main fuel tank caught fire and the crew were ordered to abandon the aircraft, which crashed near Stuttgart. The pilot and the wireless air gunner were killed. The other 5 crew members were taken as POWs. On the Milan raid of the 15th to 16th of August, the CO of the squadron, Wing Commander Gom, was killed on his second tour of operations. 10 aircraft of the squadron took part. 2 failed to return. Lancaster ED998 took off at 20:34 hours and crashed at Chuisen in France, with only 1 survivor. Lancaster JA675 took off at 20:38 hours and was shot down by a night fighter in the vicinity of Chartres. 2 of the crew survived to become POWs. The other 5 were killed. Wing Commander Gom was temporarily succeeded by Squadron Leader Raphael. The night of the 17th to 18th was Operation Hydra, the bombing of the V2 facilities at Beenemünde. It was a large-scale raid on which 10 aircraft from the squadron took part, with 2 failing to return. Lancaster ED764 took off at 21:46 hours and was hit by flak in the vicinity of Greifswald. The whole of the starboard wing and centre fuselage caught fire immediately. All aboard bailed out successfully and unhurt. However, 2 were drowned. The other 5 were taken as POWs. Lancaster LM342, piloted by the CO, Squadron Leader Raphael, took off at 21:45 hours and is believed to have crashed in the Baltic while approaching the target. Wing Commander Balmer took over as CO on the 18th. The last loss of the squadron, while at Bottesford, was on the night of the 3rd to 4th of November, with the target of Dusseldorf. 18 aircraft from the squadron took part in the raid. 1 failed to return. Lancaster JB121 took off at 17:03 hours and was shot down in the area of Chiel, North Belgium. In his report, Sergeant Morley, the wireless operator air gunner, stated, "There was a violent explosion and a blinding flash, and the aircraft was violently lifted and rocked. A great many shell splinters came through the floor of the fuselage close to the navigator's position. Pieces of red-hot metal lodged in the navigator's desk, and he was badly burned on the neck and hands. I heard the captain give the order to prepare to abandon. The navigator reached for an extinguisher to put out a fire amongst his maps and charts. The captain called out, "We are on fire, get the extinguishers here." A few seconds later he gave the order to bail out. The aircraft was losing height slowly and listing slightly as if the controls were not functioning properly. I had to wait a short while until the navigator donned his chute. Then I followed the navigator forward and saw the pilot was still flying the aircraft, which appeared under control but losing height. The bomb aimer, second pilot and flight engineer had bailed out from the front hatch. The navigator, then I followed. The guns were still firing at the aircraft and I could hear shells bursting around me. 4 of the crew were killed. 1 was taken as a prisoner of war and 2 evaded capture. The squadron received news on the 5th of January 1944 that Sergeant Morley was safe after a long walk to Gibraltar. By the time 467 Squadron was moved to Waddington on the 12th of November, it had lost 43 Lancasters on operations. Bomber Command then relinquished Bottesford, although 1524 BAT was still in residence. The airfield was to become one of the cluster of a dozen airfields in the Grantham area allocated for US Troop Carrier Command use, but it was also used for No. 30 storage dispersal site for Horsa gliders under No. 2 Heavy Glider Maintenance Unit. The 50th Troop Carrier Wing Headquarters, assigned to the 9th Air Force, arrived on the 18th of November from RAF Cottesmore, and Bottesford opened under USAAF control as Station 481, as a reception base for C-47 groups. On the 3rd of January 1944, No. 1524 BAT was moved to RAF Tollerton near Nottingham to make way for the 436th Troop Carrier Group, which arrived on the 6th. Its squadrons were the 79th, 80th, 81st and 82nd, each having 14 C-47s. On arrival at Bottesford, it began training for airborne operations. Between January and February, a G school was set up at Bottesford for training C-47 navigators in the use of this navigational aid. G was a radio navigation system which measured the time delay between 2 radio signals to produce a fix. The image I use shows the R1355 receiver on the left and the indicator unit type 62A on the right, with a simulated signal. The G school moved to RAF Cottesmore in February. The 436th moved to RAF Membury, USAAF Station 466, on the 3rd of March to be replaced by the 440th Troop Carrier Group, which arrived between the 8th to the 11th. The group comprised the 95th, 96th, 97th and 98th Squadrons, all equipped with C-47s. Again, their stay was brief, and after a period of training at Bottesford, the 440th, together with the 50th Troop Carrier Wing Headquarters, moved to RAF Exeter, USAAF Station 463, on the 26th of April. Bottesford for the next 2 months was used solely for glider repair, before being returned to the RAF in July and given to No. 5 Group, but it was soon transferred to No. 7 Group Training Command. On the 28th, number 1668 Heavy Conversion Unit reformed at Bottesford with Lancasters to become the sole resident unit. On the 7th of October, number 72 base formed, with Bottesford becoming the parent station with control of Langar and Saltby. Number 1668 were joined on the 1st of September by number 1321 Bomber Defence Training Flight, when it reformed at Bottesford with 8 Hurricanes for fighter affiliation with number 1668 and 1669 HCU at Langar. However, their stay was brief, and on the 1st of November, number 1321 BDTF was disbanded, and on the 11th, 7 Group Communications Flight reformed at Bottesford with 2 Dominis, 2 Proctors, and 1 Magister. Flying accidents still happened at Bottesford while under 7 Group control, of course. Lancaster LL636 was airborne at 10:10 hours on the 7th of January 1945 for a training sortie. It landed safely back at Bottesford. However, at 11:26 hours, while taxiing back to dispersal, the starboard inner engine caught fire, and the aircraft sustained significant fire damage. The aircraft was not repaired, assessed as damaged beyond economic repair. On the 15th of January, Lancaster LM619 was airborne at 18:20 hours for night bombing practice. At 20:30 hours, when it was returning to RAF Bottesford, it overshot and dived into the ground at Moor Drain, Church Lane, Westborough. 6 of the 7 crew were killed. Lancaster JB228 took off at 11:15 hours on the 10th of March for a cross-country training flight. While in flight, the port outer engine failed and was feathered, but the pilot was unable to trim the aircraft sufficiently to prevent the aircraft from turning to port. At 11:50 hours, the Lancaster landed at RAF Fiskerton and swung off the runway, causing the undercarriage to collapse and the aircraft to catch fire and be destroyed. 2 of the crew, Sergeant Mitchell and Sergeant Darcy, required treatment at RAF Hospital Rorseby. It wasn't just accidents. On the night of March the 20th, a lone Junkers 88 raided the airfield, dropping several bombs in a low pass over the runways and buildings, and attempted to fire cannon shells into a train standing at Bottesford Station, but all with little success. On the 11th of April, number 72 base was disbanded. During the afternoon of the 13th of May, Lancaster LM724 was flown on a basic circuits and landings training exercise. During one of the takeoffs in a crosswind, the main port tyre burst, but the pilot was able to get the aircraft into the air. The Lancaster was diverted to the emergency landing airfield at Carnaby and landed at 16:10 hours. Unfortunately, the pilot could not prevent the aircraft from swinging, and eventually the undercarriage collapsed. Fortunately, all the crew was safe. On the 18th of May, at 10:54 hours, Lancaster HK739 attempted to take off, but failed to become airborne. It swung off the runway and crashed through the perimeter fence. The aircraft was written off, but all 7 crew survived. Number 1 Bomber Defence Training Flight formed on the 6th of June within 1668 HCU with 3 Beaufighters and 3 Spitfires to provide air combat training. Beaufighter MM883 took off for a training flight on the 22nd of June, but was damaged on landing at 15:42 hours when the starboard tyre burst, followed by the port tyre and the collapse of the port undercarriage. 2 of the 3 crew were injured. By September it was all over. 1668 HCU and number 1 BTDF were moved to RAF Cottesmore on the 17th, and Bottesford was closed for flying, apart from use as a relief landing ground for number 17 Service Flying Training School at Cranwell. The unwanted airfield was turned over to number 256 Maintenance Unit at RAF Barkston Heath as a sub-site for war surplus storage from the 1st of October. Number 17 Service Flying Training School at Cranwell relinquished Bottesford on the 18th of June 1947, and number 256 MU departed on the 30th of November 1948. Number 93 Maintenance Unit at RAF Wickenby used Bottesford as a sub-site for ammunition storage on the runways from the 17th of January 1949 to the 31st of January 1959, when Bottesford was transferred to Number 92 Maintenance Unit for nuclear weapon storage. This ended on the 4th of March 1960, when the RAF finally departed Bottesford for good, and the airfield was put up for sale. Most of it was bought in 1962 by John Rose for a civilian warehousing company, and the Roseland Group Ltd continues to operate from the former airfield, using the restored control tower as the company's office. Bruce Barrymore Halpenny wrote in his first Ghost Stations volume that since closure many strange happenings have been reported from the airfield, and that, it is said, the sound of a World War II bomber has been heard flying overhead at dusk. One account from Bottesford occurred on a foggy autumn morning in 1981, when a man who had stopped his car at the road that cuts through part of one side of the old airfield went for a walk around. He stated that, suddenly, out of the mist, walked an airman in full flying kit. My mouth opened, and I could not speak. He just disappeared. In addition, strange sounds have been heard emanating from inside the control tower, and flashing lights, like a torch being flashed around, have been seen there. On several occasions the local police were notified and investigated, but as Mr. Barrymore Halpenny quotes one policeman as saying, "We can't ignore the reports in case something is going on at the old airfield, but we have never found any signs of human activity there at all." Dave Cox wrote to me on YouTube on the 21st of September 2025, also confirming the Bottesford Tower lights. My brother used to do security patrols there, and often saw the control tower lights on at night, when there was no power in the building. He added that numerous times police were called thinking drugs were being flown in private planes. From Haunted Nottinghamshire by Len Mokes, published in 1987, we obtain a few more accounts. When John Rose founded the Newark Storage Company, the hangars were used, as they are today, as warehouses. Rumours began to circulate that the control tower was haunted. Lorry drivers on their way to the hangars reported seeing the figure of an airman on the balcony, and they were able to observe it long enough to note that the chin strap on its flying helmet was unfastened. It would then disappear. One evening a few years ago, a lorry driver, after unloading his vehicle, decided to take a stroll. As he approached one of the hangars, he heard the sound of a multi-engined aircraft being revved up inside, together with voices and laughter. Somewhat puzzled by this, he opened a small door at the side of the hangar and peered inside. Although the sound continued, the hangar remained empty. He lost no time in getting back to his vehicle. With permission from the storage company, the Nottingham Psychical Research Group were able to spend the night of October the 26th, 1985, inside the control tower. Len Mokes writes that, "On this occasion I had travelled with Roy, and as we left the airfield I was surprised when this astute Yorkshireman confessed that while waiting at the bottom of the staircase he had felt uneasy. He had sensed an atmosphere which he had not felt before. Later he declared that, whilst waiting for me to descend the stairs, he became aware of a presence behind him. He kept glancing over his shoulder, but there was nothing to be seen, and he was relieved to get out of the building. Jason John Cook wrote to me about an experience from 2009 when he was based in Hangar 10. In 2009 I heard the ghostly plane while loading out and at first described it as a Fordson tractor engine. Later on that week I went onto YouTube and listened to Just Jane, the Avro Lancaster based at East Kirby, and it was the same sound. He added that last year there was a local farmer who also heard the same thing at 2 in the morning when he was awoken by the strange noise, but he dismisses it as his imagination. On the Key Publishing Aviation Forum back in March 2011, forum member Jack Russell wrote that one of his clients lived adjacent to Bottesford airfield, and as he'd heard many local tales of strange lights coming on at night from the control tower, he asked her if she'd ever seen anything. She replied she had for a while, but now it seemed to have stopped. But she still got the knocking on her front door in the middle of the night. She went on to explain it was the lost airman and his dog. She thought he didn't know where he was and was knocking to find out. I sat quietly for a while, but then couldn't resist asking how. If she'd never actually seen him and only heard him, how did she know he had a dog? Because, she explained, her gardener used to complain that after he'd carefully dug over the flower beds near the door, there would often be a man's footprints, accompanied by paw prints in the freshly dug soil. Jason Reed wrote to me on the 30th of August 2024 with the following account. When I was young, I was out shooting one day with friends. One evening, using a lamp, we came round the corner, shone the lamp, and there were 3 or 4 airmen standing in the field. But as quickly as we saw them, they disappeared. Colin H. wrote to me via YouTube on the 27th of September 2025 with the following information. I have only visited Bottesford once, but when I was there I had the strongest feeling that I had been there before. I also, on and off, heard noises like people talking, although I was on my own. Not conversations, just sort of low sounds. That's genuine, and I didn't feel uncomfortable at all. It was around where one of the old hangars was, and it was about 40 years ago. And lastly, John Good wrote on Facebook on the 13th of January 2025 about an encounter in Bottesford's control tower. My friend was an electrician rewiring it. At the end of the day, he was putting his tools away with his co-worker when someone suddenly shouted, "Catch!" They looked up, and a uniformed person threw a box down at them. My mate put his arms out to catch it, and it went through them. They never went back. About the control tower, John stated, I used to live near it. You'd always avoid it. It didn't want you about.